Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am so happy to be with you for this interview Tuesday. It is an appropriate interview for this week since it is Halloween on Thursday, and one of the books that I'm speaking about, yes, this interview involves two books by this fabulous author. One of the books is called the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop, and while it's not about Halloween per se, it is about magic and witches, and it takes place September and October, right during, Halloween and Samhain. So it is a very appropriate book for this week. So I am speaking, as I said, with, did I say her name? That's terrible. 2 minutes in, not even 2 minutes in, I can't remember things. I'm speaking with Abigail Drake, and we're speaking about two of her books, The Hocus Pocus Magic Shop and another book called Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone. Both of which are just fun titles. They have really fun cover art also. Both of these books would make me pick them up if I saw them on a shelf somewhere, and the names and the cover art would definitely draw me in. So let me go ahead and give you the description of the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop. When chemist Grace O'Leary finds a book of magic spells hidden in her Aunt Lucy's rundown magic shop, the scientist in her itches to try them out. She mixes up a batch of love potions as a joke and has to face the consequences when they actually seem to work. Her dream of becoming a professor is in peril, and time is running out to finish research for her dissertation. She can't handle any more distractions, but the magic shop is on the verge of closing. Her aunt has become forgetful and confused, and a handsome reporter named Dario Fontana keeps sniffing around her for a story. The last thing she needs is for him to find out about the love potions and expose her as a fraud. But she begins to trust him, and the sizzling chemistry between them is soon too powerful to deny. With her personal and professional life in chaos and her budding relationship with Dario in jeopardy, Grace is faced with a difficult choice. Fixing what is broken means going against every logical bone in her body. Can Grace learn to silence her scientific brain long enough to accept the truth about magic and also about herself? That is, again, the description of the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop by Abigail Drake. This is actually the second in a series, the South Side Stories, but can definitely very easily be read as a standalone. I have read it as a standalone, so I know of what I speak. After reading this, though, I want to go back and read the first one, which is called The Enchanted Cafe? The Enchanted Garden Cafe, I think is what it is. I apologize if I got that wrong. And it's just a series of stories taking place in this same neighborhood. And there are so many wonderful characters in this book that I can imagine a lot of different directions that Abigail could go with the next several stories, and we talk a little bit about that, and there's a character in here that is possibly going to get her own story, and I'm very excited about that. So that is the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop. As I said, we talk about two books, and I will read you the description of the second book a little later as we go through a little closer to when we actually talk about it in the interview, so that it'll be fresher in your mind. Not because you're forgetful, but I'm feeling very forgetful today, so I'm projecting that onto you. Let's go ahead and get to that interview with Abigail Drake. Our first book is The Hocus Pocus Magic Shop, and then later we'll be talking about Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone. Hi, Abigail. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm happy to be here, Sarah.
I am happy to have you here, and I'm so excited to talk about two of your recent books. Before we get to the books, though, if you could just share a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Well, I live in Beaver, Pennsylvania, which is in Beaver County, next to the Beaver River, and it's also near Big Beaver, Little Beaver, Western Beaver. There wasn't a lot of originality in naming these places, I guess. But I have 3 sons who are all grown up and a dog who is still at home, and he makes very poor decisions, so he keeps me very busy.
Yes, and we are going to talk about the dog a little bit later.
Yes.
But let's start with, since it's October, let's start with the more Halloween-feeling book, and that's the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop. Can you talk a little bit about the story?
Well, it's the story of a woman named Grace O'Leary, who is a PhD candidate for chemistry, and she discovers that she has a talent for mixing up love potions that actually seem to work.
Yes, and what was your inspiration for this particular story?
Well, there's an area, I live near Pittsburgh, and there's an area near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not California. I used to live near Pittsburgh, California, so I thought I better clarify. But there's an area in Pittsburgh called the South Side, and it's sort of this funky, eclectic, hippie area where there are 5-star restaurants, and then there are, like, reflexology shops and just all kinds of different things right next to each other. One time when I was there, I was walking down the street behind 5 nuns who were all in their habits, and next to them was a man dressed entirely in gold lame with a net shirt, like it was fishnet t-shirt and a turban. So you just don't know what you're going to see there, and I love this part of the city. I find it so inspiring. So I set the first book in the series there. It's called The Enchanted Garden Cafe, and now I'm working my way through different made-up shops in the South Side, and the second one is the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop.
And actually, thank you for that, because I was thinking as I was reading this, why Pittsburgh? You know, it just doesn't strike me as like a terribly magical place.
Well, there's an explanation. You know, the 3 rivers. They said that there's a secret river. I mean, this is actually a true story. I'm not making this up. That there's a hidden river underneath all the rivers of Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is a city that meets in the area of 3 rivers. The 3 rivers have a confluence right where Pittsburgh is. And there's actually another river underneath that was hidden, and they only discovered it when they put in our subway system. So that river ties into some of the stories as well. So Pittsburgh is actually very magical. You can see.
It's not the first word that usually pops to mind. I would think when most people think about Pittsburgh, but maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong.
You'll have to come here and see, and then you can determine.
I used to live in Pennsylvania, but I've nenever been to Pittsburgh, so I only lived there a year, and I lived in Berwick.
Oh, is that Eastern Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's over by Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, that area.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I didn't live near Pittsburgh, but the main character in the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop is named Grace. What about her do you think will resonate with your readers?
I think Grace is a very intelligent and kind of nerdy and gifted person, and I think she also doesn't recognize the fact that she's gifted sometimes. And I think we're all guilty of that. It's very funny because we can recognize when our friends and family members have a gift, and we'll say, oh my goodness, you have such a gift for singing, or you have such a gift for making people feel comfortable, or something like that. But we don't understand what our own gifts are. We don't see what our own gifts are. And so I think that's something that would resonate with most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you mentioned, this is the second book in the South Side stories. It can definitely be read as a standalone novel, which is great. But how many books do you envision for the series?
Well, possibilities are just limitless. Right now, I've mapped out 4 books. I'm working on the 3rd right now. It's kind of giving me problems, but I'm plowing through it. But there are actually so many more stories because every time I write a book, unexpected characters come up. And so those characters, I feel, need their own story sometimes. I have one character, her name's Sally, and she owns a secondhand vintage clothing store, and she's trans. And everyone is saying Sally needs her own story. So eventually Sally's going to have her own story. And it wasn't in the original plan because she started out as kind of a minor character, but then became such a major character as the series went on. So, she's going to get her own series too. That's going to be
good.
Future. Or not her own series, her own book.
Her own story, yes. Yes.
She needs her own series, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. Yes, you could have a whole series set in her secondhand store, and she could use her magical abilities to clothe people in the proper attire.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You've gotten the gist of the whole series. In each series, the character has, it's magical realism. So there's a hint of something magical. In the first book, the character was a baker in the Enchanted Garden Cafe. And the magical element was actually the fountain in their back garden of their coffee shop. In the second book, Hocus Pocus, it's the ability to mix love potions. And so in each one, there's a subtle kind of magic that you're not sure if it's truly magic or not, but there's a hint of it. So I enjoy the whole idea of magical realism because I think there really is a lot of magic in everyday things. And I enjoy putting that in my stories.
Seriously, how fun does this book sound? We are going to take our first break of the podcast. And when we come back, we'll be talking more about the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop, specifically the chemistry aspect of the book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Abigail Drake about 2 of her new novels. We're currently talking about the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop, and we've talked a little bit about the magic. Now we're going to talk about the chemistry.
Yeah. There's magic, there's also chemistry. So are you a chemist, or did you have to research that part of the book?
Oh, I researched so much because I am not a chemist. But I have 3 sons, and one of them is a teaching assistant. He's a senior in college, and he's a teaching assistant in organic chemistry. And after I wrote the book and researched and made sure I got everything right, I asked him if I could read the scenes involving chemistry to him, and he got very concerned because he thought I meant romantic chemistry. And I said no, I mean actual chemistry, because he wanted no part of listening to my love scenes being read aloud. But I read the first part to him, which was I described the character's thesis. And he listened, and he got this very odd look on his face of both sort of surprise and horror, because he said, that makes sense. It's absolutely right. And he said, but I'm terrified because I know you probably have no idea what you're talking about. I said, does that matter? As long as I've got the science right. And right. So it is scary how much you can learn by Googling. But in addition to my reluctant child, who I made double check things, I had a science sensitivity reader for my book. My friend is she's an editor for science papers and science books. So she read it just to make sure I didn't, totally mess something up. And she was pleasantly surprised too. So I scored good points with both of them. But I by the way, I also had 2 additional sensitivity readers for this book. I try to incorporate them anytime I feel they're needed. But this book, I had one she's a witch. So she made sure that I got all my Wiccan ceremonies and everything right. And my other sensitivity reader she's a tarot card reader. So she made sure I got all the things that involved that right as well, because I didn't want to mess either of those things up, because I've never actually been to a tarot card reading. And I've also never been a witch. I mean,
right. Well, and I could imagine it would be easy to kind of, without meaning to, make those scenes a little over the top, or not quite as realistic as they could be.
Yes, and I didn't want to insult anybody. I didn't want to do something that I thought was accurate and was actually offensive. So I was very careful as I was doing that, because it is a religion, and I just didn't want to mess it up.
Right. Well, I thought you did a great job with Grace also, because the way she talks sounds like, she's very, very smart and she knows what she's talking about, but it's also very natural. Like, it doesn't seem forced when she talks about chemistry, and it was easy to read and not like, whoa, that was way too much information. So.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. One person said, who exactly are you writing this book for? Because are your readers really this smart? And I said, I have faith in my readers. I think they are this smart. So I felt a little nervous when it first came out that perhaps I'd put a little bit too much science in it. But not one person has complained about that. So I kind of figured I'm right. And I got
nice.
just the right level of it.
Each chapter starts with a chemistry quote, pun, something. Where did you get all of those?
Well, my son, who is the chemistry TA, has, for a very long time, he's collected nerdy T-shirts. And it's sort of been his I don't know, his symbol or something. He always gets nerdy T-shirts and nerdy socks for Christmas, and he loves to wear them. And so I really enjoyed trying to find him different shirts that would make him chuckle. So as I was doing that, I was sort of making up some on my own and using a few that I had seen on T-shirts before as well, because I found them so amusing.
I had to laugh because just today on Facebook, I saw somebody had posted, if at first you don't succeed, try 2 more times to make sure it's just statistically relevant. Yeah, I was like, hey, I just read that.
That's the thing. I mean, those are so funny. I think my favorite might have been, you must be a DNA helicase because I want to unzip your jeans or something like that.
Yes,
and that one, I was dying when I may have gotten that wrong when I said it right there. But and also, do these protons make my mass look big?
Yes. There were some very good ones in there, and some of them that I was like, I have to think a little bit about that one.
Now, I can't guarantee I would wear all of them on a T-shirt, but there were several of the chapter openers that I would consider wearing on a T-shirt. I'm not great at science, but I am a fan of wordplay. So, yeah, I would wear a nerdy chemistry shirt. I'd wear a lot of nerdy shirts, frankly. But we are going to take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we will be switching focus and talking about love, chocolate, and a dog named Al Capone. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Abigail Drake. We have been talking about the Hocus Pocus magic shop, but as I said before the break, we are now going to turn our attention to Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone. First of all, the title itself is fabulous. Capone, the newly acquired puppy of Miss Josephine St. Clair, owner of Bartleby's Books, is a literature-loving Labrador. Obsessed with Jane Austen and cursed with a terrible name, Capone hopes to change his doggy karma and prove he's just as much a gentleman as the heroes in his favorite books, by finding the perfect Mr. Darcy for the lonely and bookishly adorable Ms. Josie. Unfortunately, the only men Miss Josie seems to encounter aren't Darcys at all. They're Wickhams, Churchills, and Willoughbys. Even worse, there is trouble afoot. Someone has been sabotaging Miss Josie's business, and all signs point to her evil ex. Can Capone find a way to save Bartleby's Books, help Miss Josie find her true love, and earn, at long last, a name befitting a true gentleman? I love Capone. I love this book. It's so cute. It is so sweet, and it is told from the dog's perspective. This is a dog who loves Jane Austen. This is a dog who loves PBS. This is a dog who starts the book by watching a TV show on PBS about being a Regency gentleman, and decides that it is his goal in life to be a Regency gentleman. It's just, as I say in the interview, it made me laugh a lot. Every time somebody told Capone he was a bad dog, my heart broke a little bit because I got a little too invested in Capone's story. But seriously, it's got books, it's got Jane Austen, it's got an adorable dog, it's got romance, it's got mystery, it's got humor. Yeah, so much fun. I enjoyed this book so much I can't even tell you. So, yes, loved it. And I'm going to stop yammering about my love for Capone and let Abigail talk about the book and the real life Capone.
Well, on a different note, the second book we're talking about today is called Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone, which I don't even know that you need to describe it. Maybe you should unpack the title a little bit. Plus, on the cover it says Pride, Prejudice, and Puppies, which is great alliteration. And so let's talk about that one.
Well, this book happened by accident, as most of my books do. I have a black lab, and his name is Capone. That's his actual name. And he makes a lot of very bad choices, poor decisions. I think he's like a typical lab in many ways, but sort of worse. Like every lab you've ever met times two. He's sitting here right now acting like an angel, but this is not the normal situation. But, so when I first got him, it was the first pet we'd ever had as a family. And he's 5 years old now. But when we first got him, I have nieces who live very far away. They live in Istanbul, Turkey. My husband's from Istanbul. And when we got the puppy, they were so excited, but they wanted to see pictures of the puppy every single day. And so I thought, well, that will be annoying on Facebook. So I created a Facebook page for my dog called Capone the Wonder Dog, and started posting pictures of Capone along with like a little story of what completely idiotic thing he had done the day before. And he gave me tons of material. I mean, there has not been a day in 5 years that I haven't had something to write about. So I started doing this, and I wasn't really thinking about it, that other people would be able to see it because it's a page, it's public. And it never even occurred to me. I don't know, I wasn't even thinking about it. And pretty soon I noticed other people were commenting and reading, and then there were people I know and people who live in my town who I didn't know, and then like people in Iceland, people in Holland. Like it became very strange. There's a woman in Brazil who comments every day in Portuguese, and she's lovely, and I do Google Translate so I can respond to her. But it started becoming a very big thing, and now I have about 10,000 views a week.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, and the people on it kept saying, can you please put a dog in a book? And so I decided, at first I thought, I'll write a children's book. And then I said, I write women's fiction. That's what I know how to do. So I'm going to figure out how to do this. So it's a love story, but it's told from the perspective of the puppy. So the entire book is narrated by the dog, which is the voice that's used in my Facebook page. And a lot of the things that happen in this book, my dog actually truly did. So I'm not going to say it's autobiographical because I am not. The main character owns a bookstore and she falls in love with a man who owns a coffee shop. So it's not autobiographical in that sense, but in the sense that my dog did eat things that got stuck in his intestinal tract more times than I could count, then yeah, that's kind of, it's truth, not fiction.
my poor husband has been so annoyed with me reading this book at night because I keep giggling, and he's like, would you go in another room? I'm trying to watch TV. And I'm like, but the dog just did X, Y, and Z. I love that it's told from Capone's point of view.
Oh, thank you very much. That was another thing that I wasn't sure how people were going to take it. Some people, I assumed they would not want to read a book entirely from an animal's point of view. But then someone else said, The Art of Racing in the Rain just came out. It's the same kind of idea. So it is something that a lot of people understand and like. And so far I've gotten some really positive responses from it, and so I'm very happy about that. And not just from, like my cousins, my family.
Right.
It's also from people I don't know. So the people who don't read his page, because I figured the people who read his page would understand and they would get into it. But the people who don't read his page, that was kind of the wild card. I wasn't sure if they would get it, but they do.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it says Pride, Prejudice, and Puppies on the front, and so Capone, just, oh my God, I could talk to you for like 4 hours about Capone, but I'm going to try to hold myself back. I love that he watches a PBS special at the beginning, and so he wants to be a gentleman, and then he wants to be Mr. Darcy. I mean, yes. He's a very literary dog.
Yes, he is. He is. I imagine that's how he thinks. Well, not really. He actually only thinks of food and when can I have food next, and
yes,
that's about all he thinks about. But I like to imagine that he has much deeper and more profound thoughts than he actually does.
Right. But just, I have two dogs as well, and so I keep thinking of what their inner voices.
Well, what is not in this book? In August, which was exactly 2 months before the book came out, I live in the countryside, and I often walk Capone in a meadow, and we usually go out at sunrise. And there is a cornfield in the meadow. My cousin actually owns the meadow, and she grows corn for the deer. But Capone discovered he has a taste for corn, and unbeknownst to me, when he was running around, he was sneaking into the corn and stealing corn, which it is the number one cause of obstruction in dogs. I did not know
Yes.
this. It was a rookie mistake here. I didn't know he was eating it, number one. And when I figured it out, I kept him away from the corn, but it was already too late. He had to have emergency abdominal surgery to remove the 5 corn cobs that were stuck in his stomach. 5.
Jeez.
stomach was twisted. His intestines were twisted. I mean, the dog came very close to dying. It was horrible. But the people on his Facebook page were so incredibly kind. I mean, he was getting gifts and cards every single day. It was so nice. And they were sending wine for me, which was like even better.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's so sweet. Yeah. That's very, very sweet. But maybe we should talk about the humans in the book, though, I suppose.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, they do play a minor role.
So it is a bit of a Pride and Prejudice type love story between, as you said, the owner of a bookstore and the owner of a coffee shop. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Well, I loved the idea of the dog trying to set up his owner, who he loves, trying to find a Mr. Darcy for her. And I love the idea that a dog would see things very differently, because Capone loves everybody. And so, like, the dog trainer, he was obsessed with his dog trainer because Capone needed a lot of training, like more training than any other dog I've ever heard of. And he still isn't really trained, but that's okay. That's thousands of dollars well spent. I thought it would be fun. I live in Beaver. That's where the book is set. And it's a small little town where everybody knows everybody, and we're all so interconnected. And I loved using this town as a setting, and I loved having introducing the characters and their pets through the dog's eyes. So that was fun. Mm-hmm. But the main character, Josie, owns a bookstore, and she's a shy woman who's had a lot of loss in her life. She lost her parents, and then her long boyfriend, she found out he was married, so she's been going through a rough time, and Capone sees that and tries to help her. And fortunately, there's a very hot guy living next door who owns a coffee shop, so that all works out just perfectly.
As it should, yes. So how about research for this book? What did you work? Obviously, Capone is your source material, but
yes, actually, the dog, yeah. But there was actually research that went into this book too, because the main character Josie owns a bookstore, and it's a rare bookstore, which I don't really know very much about. I know about books, but I don't know about rare books. And something happened in Pittsburgh that inspired the plot. One of the plot lines in Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone. There's a big library in Pittsburgh called the Carnegie Library, and they discovered that one of the people who was managing the Carnegie Library was stealing books and stealing pages from books. And as he walked home, there's a bookshop across the street from the library called Caliban's, and he was walking home and dropping off these things at Caliban's bookstore, and they were selling them on the black market for rare books or whatever. So he basically destroyed so many books in this library, and he did it in order to finance the private education of his children. So because he wanted them to go to private school, I guess that was the gist of it. But wow, I found it so sneaky, and so then I never realized, like, what if you have this book that's a treasure and it's an old book, that if you take out a page, you've ruined the book. Like, it's kind of like when you get a collectible superhero character in a box. If you open the box, it's gone, it's done. Same thing, I think. So anyway, it was fun to research all about rare books and how they're handled, and where they're kept, and the prices that some books were sold for, and things like that. So I found it really fascinating. It was a fun kind of research for me. It was much more fun than researching chemistry.
I can imagine, yeah.
It was in my wheelhouse a little bit.
Yes, did you have to research coffee, or are you just a coffee connoisseur?
Oh, goodness, no. Yeah, I'm addicted to coffee. That's not a problem.
Not a problem. So when did you actually start writing? Is it something that you've always wanted to do, or how did that come about?
Well, actually, I majored in Japanese and international economics in college. I have a minor in Asian studies. Well, it's called a certificate in Asian studies, but it's a minor. And I spent the first decade of my career working in import-export. I lived abroad for 6 years, and I worked for international trading companies. Well, the first year I was in Japan, I taught, and then after that I worked in trading companies. But we ended up moving a lot. I met my husband while we were both working in Japan, and we moved to Istanbul, and then we ended up moving a lot throughout the States. We lived in Lodi, California, and we lived in...
Oh my gosh, Kentucky. I lived in Lodi, California.
What? You're kidding.
No.
When were you there? I was there in 1995?
I moved there 2010, so...
yeah, I'm just
later than you.
Yes, I lived on Mockingbird Lane. I don't know if you're familiar with that street at all.
I lived on Pleasant Avenue. Those both sound so much lovelier than Lodi actually is.
Yeah, really. But it was cool because you're like 2 hours away from Carmel, 2 hours away from Yosemite, 2 hours away from Tahoe. Like, you're like in the middle of all these cool things. And San Francisco's only an hour and a half away, so it was very, very neat for us. I just said Lodi thinking she's not going to know where Lodi is, but I'll just say Lodi.
Totally know where Lodi is.
I worked at University of the Pacific in Stockton.
In Stockton,
Yeah. But then we moved to Kentucky. Please don't tell me you lived in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
No, sorry.
And then we moved to Michigan and then came back to Pennsylvania. So, but when we moved back here, I finally had the chance to write full time. And I thought, let's just do it and give it a shot. And I had the full support of my wonderful husband, who was awesome. But we'd moved so many times that I had to start a job, quit a job, start a job, quit a job. It was always kind of following his career path. And so he said, finally, this is what you've always wanted to do. Give it a shot. So I started about 10 years ago, and the first book, it sucked. It was so bad. But then the second book sucked a little bit less. And then they got progressively better as I learned and grew and spent a lot of time working on it. And I think that the only way you can learn to write is by writing. People can tell you, I know people who have a master's in fine arts and they just sit there in front of their laptop and they're not able to write. They're like immobilized by how much they know. Perhaps it's better if you're completely ignorant and you have no idea what you're doing. Because maybe you're a little freer that way. I'm not sure.
So what would your advice for aspiring authors be besides try not to know too much?
Yeah. No, you should learn things. You should listen to people and all that sort of thing. The most important thing you have to do is put your butt in the chair and write. And it's also important to not be so hard on yourself. I know so many writers who never feel like what they've written is good enough. And so they just keep going over it and over it and over it. I know people who worked on one book for 10 years and they're not done yet. Because they never feel satisfied with how it is. They feel like they have to change it and restructure it and do this. There is no single right way to write any story. There's no way that's 100% right, and there's no way that's 100% wrong. You just have to do the best that you can, and you have to know, you have to let it go eventually. You have to turn off your perfectionist brain and just let it go, because otherwise it's just going to stay on your laptop forever. And that's like the saddest thing I've ever heard, because a book isn't really complete in any way until somebody reads it. I feel like it's one thing, there's a joy in writing it, but there's another kind of joy when somebody reads it and enjoys your book.
Absolutely. And how many published novels do you have now?
11. And also, I'm in several anthologies. I have a couple of novellas. One is about a hairdresser from outer space. don't know. But yeah. And then I have some short stories in anthologies. One anthology just came out. It's called Over the River and Through the Woods. And it's with a group of wonderful people that I go on writing retreats with. They're called the Mindful Writers. So we basically get together 3 times a year and sit in a lodge in the mountains and don't talk to each other at all. We just sit there and write. We do nothing but write all day. And it's like the best week ever because we talk during meals. But we're kind of like monks or something. We've taken a vow of silence and we don't talk to each other. But we get so much work done, and it's amazing. But we've done 2 anthologies, and each one we donate all the proceeds to charity. The first one we donated to the Children's Heart Foundation, and this anthology, which just came out, is being donated to the retreat center that we use for our retreats. They do a lot of work with children. They have camps all summer for children, and it's a very valuable resource for their local community. So the proceeds this year are going to their camp. So
nice.
That was a fun one to write about. And that one's about a snark. My short story is about a snarky elf. So
nice.
yes, my friends call it elf porn, but that is not true.
Oh my goodness.
There's no content. I swear there's no content. I swear. But that's actually a thing. I don't know if you know that or not. That is a genre that's popular.
Yeah, so it's a genre, and that is the end of our interview, but not intentionally. No, I did not just randomly end on talking about elf porn, although it is kind of funny the way that worked out. We had extremely high winds here over the weekend, and the internet was knocked out for many hours throughout the weekend, throughout the day. Finally came back sometime Monday morning. So, yeah, we were talking, and then all of a sudden the internet connection went out, and we didn't have a way to continue the conversation and continue recording. So we were chatting back and forth via Instagram. Well, first of all, Abigail said she broke my recording process by the conversation, which I thought was hilarious. But then I said, so is there anything else that you wanted to add? You know, cause I didn't get to the question of, we've talked about all these things. What else do you want to add? So she didn't have anything else to add, but we also didn't get to the part where we talk about how you can find her on the internet. So I can do that for you. Her website is easy enough. It is abigaildrake.com, and that is spelled how you would think it would be spelled, ABIGAILDRAKE, abigaildrake.com. You can find her on Facebook at Abigail Drake Writer, on Twitter at Drake Abigail, and Capone. You can follow Capone on Instagram and on Facebook. It is just, if you just look up Capone the Wonder Dog, you will find him, and I am following him because I am a Capone fan. He is my new imaginary, best literary puppy friend. I can say that and not offend my own puppies because they are real puppies, and this is an imaginary literary puppy. Actually, they'd still be offended. They'd still be like, "Really, Mom? Really? You've replaced us with an imaginary Labrador? How could you?" So I just won't tell them. Please don't tell them. I will get in so much trouble if they find out that I have an imaginary dog friend. At any rate, because my memory is shot today for some reason, I did not mention at the beginning that I do have copies of these wonderful books to give away. So, as usual, just go to our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on this episode 192, interview with Abigail Drake. And you can, actually, let's see. We have, if you would like to be considered for a copy of the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop, tell me your favorite Halloween costume that you ever had as a kid. And if you want to be considered for Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone, tell me your favorite Jane Austen novel. So, comment on that post and you'll be entered to win a copy of either the Hocus Pocus Magic Shop or Love, Chocolate, and a Dog Named Al Capone. I would like to thank Abigail so much for putting up with the technical difficulties that the wind caused my internet. She was a hoot to talk to even after we got done, and we were chatting via Instagram. I was still having so much fun chatting with her. So if Capone is my new imaginary literary dog friend, then I've decided that Abigail is my new imaginary best author friend. I have about 40 of those. No, I've done so many interviews, it's way more than 40. You know me, I've said this before and I've put it on social media. I fall a little bit in love with the authors that I talk to every time. I come away with a tiny bit of an author crush, and sometimes I just decide that they'll be my imaginary best friends. No, I don't really stalk them or anything in real life. Don't worry, I don't take my obsession that far. I just enjoy chatting with authors. So before I freak you out more and you decide that I need therapy, I'm going to wrap this episode up. Thank you, as always, for joining me for the GSMC Book Review podcast. Please join me again on Friday when I will be speaking to Edward Willett about his new book, Master of the World. It is the second in the World Shapers series, and it is also a lot of fun. We'll be turning our attention to fantasy and science fiction on Friday, so join me for that. In the meantime, happy Halloween. Hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope you find time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.